Oh, and I'm yelling. Oh, the microphone's on. I'm yelling, too. Okay. Do. Oh, we started. Hello, everyone. This is Want to Make a Change. Stop talking and start listening. My name is Jonathan Maltz. If after this presentation you have any questions, comments, concerns, jokes you want to send my way, you can do that by emailing me, maltz@yelp.com, or sending them to me through the Twitterverse as @maltzj. Also, I will have you know that I start every presentation this way, and no one has yet to send me a joke yet. So please, if you have jokes, @maltzj, I would love to appreciate them. My girlfriend and I are having a joke contest, so I need material. So I work at Yelp. For those of you who didn't read that part, Yelp's mission is to connect people with great local businesses. And one of the big ways that we do that is we're constantly collaborating with each other. Our engineers are working with other engineers to figure out how we can build the best features. Our engineers are working with designers to figure out how we can bridge their vision with what's possible in terms of an engineering context. And everyone's working together with product managers to figure out how can we build what's right for our business and keep the lights on at Yelp. And when this is going well, it's really awesome. We're able to build great products together, we're able to learn from each other, and we're just able to do things that otherwise wouldn't be possible if we were doing it by ourselves. But sometimes it can feel a little bit like this. And if seeing some of the presentations that I've seen over the past couple years is any indication, this experience isn't unique to us at Yelp. Sometimes engineers will talk about working with a designer, and they're just like, oh my gosh, my designer just doesn't understand that I need to put a ripple effect here, because ripple effects are really important. Or I was just talking to a friend of mine who's an engineer at Google, and he was saying, oh my gosh, we have this technical debt, and we need to pay down this technical debt, and we just don't, or my product manager is just not finding time for it. And I think really what the problem here is that it's a breakdown of communication. And so what I wanted to do today was to talk about a way that we can maybe break down those problems that we're seeing with communication between groups and find a way to break through those. So a word of warning before we get started is that this talk today will mostly focus on interacting with humans. Unlike computers, if you give humans the same input, they do not always produce the same output with two different humans. One could call humans very flaky tests. Humans also do not reliably decompile down to bytecode. So what works with one may not perfectly work with the other one. However, what I hope to do today is give you a frame of reference that you can think about people and their motivations and how you can communicate with them, so that when you encounter these types of problems, you have a way to break through those barriers. So let's get started. Today's presentation will focus on two big things: empathy and trust. If you are hoping to see code during this presentation, I apologize. We will just be talking about feelings and why feelings are really, really important for you effectively delivering software as part of a team. So first, let's focus on empathy. Empathy, as the Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines it, I don't know if there's a French equivalent of this, is the ability to share and understand the feelings of another person. Oftentimes, we'll talk about this, at least in the States, as walking in someone else's shoes and really feeling what they're feeling. This is kind of abstract, and it's hard to get a handle on. So I wanted to focus on a very particular type of empathy today as it relates to software engineering. And that's empathy for the incentives that other people have. So an incentive is a thing that motivates or encourages one to do something. Oftentimes, we think of incentives in the form of monetary incentives. So you go to work because you want to make money. You maybe work harder because you want to get a raise. But incentives can also take a lot of different forms. Incentives can be things like, it's really great for me when I go home and spend time with my family. So I'm incentivized to leave work earlier, so that way I get to spend more time with them. And the thing is, there's a lot of different competing groups of people that have different incentives when we're building software. And these can be wrapped up into two big classes of incentives. The first is individual incentives. So these are things which are just good for me. So if I do really well on a project, I might get a raise or a promotion, but that maybe doesn't affect any of my teammates unless they're also getting a raise or a promotion. At the same time, there are also group incentives. So group incentives that are things that everyone in a group agrees are good for them. So things like, as a group incentive might be that everyone might want to build the best possible product. Or if you're contributing to an open source library, you might just say, you know, it doesn't really matter who gets the internet fame out of this. What really matters is that we build the best possible version of a reactive streams library in Java. Now, what really great teams do and what really great managers do is they're able to take all these individual incentives and figure out group incentives that align them and work together. So now you're like, cool, so what? I'm at an Android developer conference, and here you are talking to me about feelings. How will this help me be a better software engineer? The thing is, in order to, as part of working with a team and delivering products, there are a bunch of different people with different incentives that come into play. We have engineers. We're always talking about how do we build better code, write better software. There are designers who are sometimes can feel like we're speaking an entirely different language too. And also there are product managers or product owners who are thinking about an entirely different set of things. Now, when your team is small, or maybe you're in a sort of startup-y type environment, chances are everyone's doing a little bit of everything here. Your engineers are working with your engineers are doing a little bit of product management and user testing. Your engineers might be jumping in and doing their own designs. Your designers might be jumping in and maybe learning some CSS or writing some XML layouts in order to make things work. And in this case, it's really easy to optimize across group incentives, right? Because what we're able to do is everyone easily understands the incentives of each other because we're constantly doing each other's jobs. And that's really great. At the same time, this doesn't scale very effectively because if you're a jack of all trades and you're doing everything, is that my cell phone that's causing that interference? Or is it, can you grab my, oh. Oh. Should I just keep talking? Oh, it should be good now. We'll edit that out in post-production. So when things are going really great, this is awesome in that everyone's able to understand the incentives of each other. But over time, we need to specialize because we can't build really great things if everyone's trying to do everything and can't focus and become great at any one thing. So what ends up happening is our product managers start to focus. And they start to focus on how do we pick the right features to build, and how do we find things that align our business value with maybe engineering value and working with customers to keep the lights on. Our designers might start to focus on how do we take those mocks, or those features that we want to build, and turn them into mocks that are really easy to build, and are really easy to use, and are beautiful. And our engineers are going to take all of those inputs and figure out how can we write code that actually puts that up onto a device or onto a screen somewhere so that this actually becomes a reality. And the thing is, just because people are now specializing doesn't mean that these group incentives go away. It's still just as important that we build the right product, or we figure out how to do something that requires all of these skills. But it becomes much easier for people to focus on their individual incentives and the incentives for just their specific discipline. And this can become a problem, because if we're lacking any one of these three pieces, our products start to break down. If we have engineers but not designers, maybe we end up with a beautiful project, but that project never makes money. This is great if you have a hobby project or a side project and you're just learning something new. Maybe not so great if you want to have full-time employment building this thing. So you have the product managers and designers, but engineers are shut out of the conversation. Here you end up with an unmaintainable pile of technical debt where the first couple features are super easy to implement, but over time that mountain of technical debt just drags the product down and you're unable to move forward. Lastly, maybe you have engineers and product managers, but you don't have any designers involved. And you end up with an unusable solution to a real problem that could have made you a lot of money and provided a lot of value. The truth is, you need all three of these people to be thinking about both their own incentives as well as the group incentives in order to figure out how to make the magic of building great products happen. So this will be one of a few slides that has a lot of text on it. I apologize. But I wanted to drive home a few takeaways from this presentation. The first is that when you're working with other people from other disciplines, it can feel like they're Martians from outer space who might be out to get you with their different language sometimes. The truth is, they're just people that are solving hard problems and hopefully want the same things that you do. They're just solving them in a different way than you are. Once you understand that, it becomes much easier to work with them. So now you're probably like, cool story, bro. You should tell that at parties. And I will have you know that I do tell stories about trusted empathy at parties, and I am a barrel of fun when I do it. What this means is that if you find yourself in a situation where communication is breaking down and you're just like that guy who's face palming, chances are you're communicating about your incentives to someone who doesn't necessarily share them. So what you need to do is when you're suggesting changes or different ways of doing things, you need to talk about how your change matters to someone in a language that they understand. So let's take a concrete example of that. Chances are some of us have felt this way before. We're like, oh my God, I'm drowning in technical debt here. You can tell, we'll call this woman Alice. You can tell Alice is an Android engineer because she's still waiting on her Gradle sync to happen up at the top. So now Alice, our engineer, is thinking, you know what, I should talk to our product manager to pay this down in our next sprint. So Alice goes, and in the worst case scenario, Alice is just going to think about her incentives and her language as an engineer. And as engineers, we all know that if we pay down technical debt, code's easier to work with. It's more testable. It's more maintainable. We can make each incremental change without having to worry about breaking something. So she goes and she says, you know, we should pay down technical debt in our next sprint. It'll make our code easier to work with. Now, if she was working with a really great product manager or product owner, that product manager will know that, oh yeah, easier code to work with means faster delivery. But maybe this product manager doesn't know that. And their first thought is, paying down technical debt doesn't sound like delivering customer value. It sounds like cleaning up a mess that you made for yourself 6 months ago. I don't think we have time to clean up your messes. We need to be delivering features here. That was very pejorative, so I'm sure all product managers don't think that way when they're thinking about not paying down technical debt. But I'm sure we've all heard about this idea of, I don't think we have time to pay down this technical debt. I think we need to think about delivering customer value more rapidly. And so now Alice probably goes back to her desk and is feeling something like this woman here. She's like, oh my gosh, my product manager just doesn't understand. What if we stop for a moment and to think what are the incentives here, though? So we already thought about the incentives for the engineers, and that's that the code is easier to work with. But our product managers might not understand that. But there's also an incentive for our product owners here. Our product owners, if we're paying down technical debt, we can deliver bug-free features, and we can deliver them faster. Because each incremental change, we're not going to have to worry about testing so many flows. Maybe we're able to rely on better automated tests. All those things that we're able to do once our code is clean and maintainable. And also, there's an incentive for everyone here, because if we're able to build features faster and our product managers are finding the right features to build, then we're able to build a great version of, say, Yelp. And everyone's able to be happy, and we're able to accomplish those group incentives that we have. So trying to do this exercise of figuring out what the incentives are for everyone is a great sort of tripwire that you can think about. Because sometimes you might do this, and you're like, you know, I just can't figure out how to explain this in a way that matters to someone else. And if that's the case, that's a good way to good time to take a step back and say, you know what, maybe this isn't something that's aligning our group incentives. Maybe this is something where I'm just thinking about something that really matters to me, but it doesn't matter to everyone altogether, so maybe it's not so important. It might be the case that you still need to do that thing, but it's a good way to check yourself before jumping in and maybe suggesting something that wouldn't get as much traction. Now, what if we thought about, once we've figured out these incentives, we start to think about the incentives of our product manager here. So instead, if Alice goes to our product manager and says, we should take down time to pay down technical debt in our next sprint. We have a bunch of work coming up on some challenging code, and if we take the time to refactor first, that will make the subsequent work quicker. Now, our product manager, this is a language that he's understanding, because now we're talking about things in terms of feature delivery and iteration speed. And he might think, you know, I can pay some short-term costs because we're going to get some long-term benefits. And then chances are the response will be better, which is, sure, let's see if we can get that scoped into our next sprint. So now this was a little bit of a contrived example, and you might be wondering, how can I do this? How can I bring this to my team? I'm encountering one of these challenges, and I want to figure out how to break through that. The first answer is be curious. I think sometimes as software engineers, it's so easy for us to encounter resistance to an idea that we have and say, we need to turn on the engineer brain and show why what we're suggesting is right. But sometimes what you need to do is stop trying to convince someone that you're right and just listen to why someone else disagrees with you. I was talking to a friend of mine about this, and he said this great thing, which was, if you just ask someone why they disagree with you, chances are they will tell you everything that you need to know in order to convince them to move a particular direction. So by starting sort of your first rejection with, okay, that's really interesting, tell me why you're concerned about this, then you're going to find yourself in a much better position to be able to speak someone else's language and align across those group incentives. The next thing is read lots, read all the time. You'll find that being able to use the words visual hierarchy and consistency and color theory, and being able to talk that language to your designers, for example, will go miles in terms of being able to communicate effectively with them and figure out how the two of you can collaborate better. Similar story with product managers. If you're able to talk about things like velocity or cycle time if you're using Kanban, that will put you in a much better position in order to actually improve your relationship and be able to create more change. So, takeaway number 2. It's important to learn about what other stakeholders value in order to align what you want with what they want. So that closes the section on empathy. Next, I wanted to jump in and start and talk a little bit about trust. And to frame this discussion about trust, I wanted to create a hypothetical situation, which is that I show up to your team on Monday, and I say, you should really change the way you're rendering views. It's causing performance problems. Chances are, if you're like Alice, you'd be like, who's this guy, and why is he telling me how to do my job? Now, contrast that with if Roman Guy shows up on your team on Monday, and he says, you should really change the way you're rendering views. It's causing performance problems. Chances are, Alice will think, Roman knows a thing or two about performance. I should probably listen to him. And the thing is, both hypothetical Roman, well, in real life, Roman would know this for real, but hypothetical me and Roman would both be equally right in this case. The difference is that Roman is much more trusted as someone who knows something about performance because he spent the last, I don't know, 8, 10 years just proving that he knows what's going on when it comes to Android performance. He's written blog posts, he's done talks, he's built the framework. He gave that talk he did earlier today. So people trust that he knows what he's saying when he suggests something about performance. So, big takeaway for this section is no matter how right you are, you will only be able to execute on your ideas if people trust you to execute on them. So then the question becomes, how do you build trust? It's so important for being able to get these things through, but how do you make it happen? There are a few things to think about for why someone would trust you. The first is if you have a proven track record of being correct. If you've been right before and you've shown people that you know what you're talking about, if you've given 8 years of presentations about Android performance, chances are when you say something about one of those topics, people will listen to you. Now, there's a trick here, because with great power comes great responsibility, because just because you were right in the past does not a priori mean that you're right this time. But it does mean that people will trust you more. So that means that anything that you suggest, you'll be much more likely to be able to get traction with that. Another thing that's really important, especially when you're working across groups, is people will trust you if you show that you understand their perspective and are willing to incorporate it even without their input. So if your designer knows that you have a strong foundation of graphic design, then maybe they'll be willing to say, you know what, you just take this iOS mock and just turn it into something that works for Android. Because I trust you because I know that you understand what's important to me as well. And lastly, something that's a bit counterintuitive is you're willing to admit when you're wrong. This is a little bit counterintuitive because we just talked about how important it is to be right, and now we're saying it's important to admit that you're wrong. But one of the big risks that you encounter sometimes is there are people, if you're unwilling to admit that you're wrong, then it's unclear if when you're being really strong about something, you just don't want to change your position because you're afraid of being seen as wrong, or you really truly believe in this thing. So being able to back away from things and you say, you know what, I was wrong about that, means that when you are standing really firm on something, people will be much more likely to trust you. So how can we do that? The first thing that's huge for building trust is to start with small changes. Again, if I come into your team and suggest that you need to rewrite everything, you're going to say, that's crazy. If I say, what if we just try to rewrite this one particular view here and see what changes, then you're much more likely to believe me, and that gives me an opportunity to start proving that I know what's going on. So some ways, if you're trying to work with different engineers and other people to build trust, are you can start small by trying out changes in tests. So if you think about maybe a classic example of this is adding Kotlin to your code base. If you start with a small example of putting changes in tests, it's not a huge risk, so people will be much more likely to go along with that. Similarly, if you're working with product managers and you're trying to pay down some technical debt, chances are their individual incentive might be to think about, again, feature delivery and delivering customer value. So what you can do is you can say, I think this is really important, but we're only going to do it for a couple days. We'll time box it. So if anything goes wrong, we're not taking too much of a hit in terms of our delivery. Or if you're talking to designers, you can say, you know what, I think there's this better way that we can do things, but let's not rewrite the whole app. Let's just ship a prototype, and then we'll user test with a couple people in a coffee shop or something to see what people's feedback is. And a magic phrase that is so important for this, I stole this from Ben Sussman-Collins and Brian Fitzpatrick, is the magic phrase, let's try it. Because once you get started suggesting with these small changes, chances are people aren't going to be super concerned. They're going to be like, you know, we could try to take a day to prototype what our application would look like in material design and then take 2 hours to run some user tests. That doesn't seem like a big idea. But what you're going to find is people are going to be like, I don't know, maybe we should do it, maybe we shouldn't. So you're going to need to break through oh gosh, there's a physics word. That slowness to get started, that inertia, that's the one. Isaac Newton would be proud. You're going to need to break through that inertia in order to start rolling and start being able to build that trust. And saying, you know what, let's just try it for a week or for a day. is a great way to get people on board, because then even if it doesn't go well, it gives people a chance to say, you know what, this wasn't the right thing to do, and then you can try something different and figure out what you learned from it. The next thing you can do is think about providing touch points for changes that you're making. This becomes important as you start to do bigger and bigger things and start to be a little bit more autonomous. So a touch point is a point of contact between a buyer, the person you're suggesting an idea to, and the seller, you, the person suggesting the idea. This is really important because it shows people that if this idea is crazy or it goes off the rails, even if I'm not willing to admit that I'm wrong, there's an opportunity for you to jump in and prevent it before it goes totally catastrophically wrong with your particular perspective and your knowledge. So some ways that you can provide these types of touch points are if you're working with engineers and you're suggesting a new library, you can say, I'll put you on the first code review for this. So we'll write this change, and I'm not sure how it's going to work out, but you'll have a chance to look at this and provide feedback before it goes into production. Similarly, a design document is great for this. With product managers, if you're talking about maybe changing the way that you're delivering features, or maybe you're changing the way that you're paying down technical debt and doing more time with that, providing a lot of clear tickets with progress visualizations is a great touch point to show them that, you know what, I'm not just like diddling around here looking at Reddit all day. Trust me, I'm actually doing stuff and we're delivering value here. It's sort of laughable, but at the same time, sometimes paying down technical debt can feel like that. It feels like this great exercise where no value is delivered except for cleaner code, at least to a product manager. The last point is if you're working with designers, you can say, maybe do an over-the-shoulder design review. So say, just trust me to try to make this happen, but before we ship it to production, come over and take a look at it, and if there's something that's glaringly wrong, we can change that then. Again, if that works and we start to build up more trust, chances are you might want to suggest larger and larger changes. And what becomes really important there is to have a plan. This is because, again, it's so easy to take these big, complicated things, especially things that don't necessarily have a clear value or an obvious, visible value, and just go off into a cave and hope that they work out in 3 months. And so by having a plan and turning your long-term goal into individual milestones, it gives more touch points as part of this process that allow other people to provide input and for you to show that you're considering other people's incentives and considering those group incentives at every step of the way. So that way people are much more willing to trust that you know what you're doing at every step of the path. And so as you're thinking about developing this plan and finding milestones, we at Yelp like to think about your close milestones being really well-defined, and then your further milestones are a little bit fuzzier. So you don't necessarily know exactly what you're going to do, but you know directionally how you're going to get there, and you're saying, you know what, we don't know what we're doing here, but we're going to take some input and figure out how we're going to make it happen as we go. So an example of this. Let's say that we want to rewrite our app in Kotlin, something that people have talked a lot about over the past year. First, we check the incentives, and we say faster iteration speeds, more features, better Yelp. Awesome. Our first milestone might be something as small and simple as write and build a single file in Kotlin. If we discover that for whatever reason this is incredibly hard and we're unable to do this, we haven't invested too much time, and we have a really great and easy way to back out, admit that we were wrong, and say, you know what, we're going to figure out what we can do with what we learned. Then what we'll do is we've sort of paid down some risk in this project, so now I'll have one engineer just write their tests in Kotlin. Then what this will do is this will help us build some trust that we actually know what we're doing on this with this language. And so we're paying down some risk because then that person will be able to teach more engineers how to write this language. Then all of our engineers can be writing their tests in Kotlin. We're still not negatively affecting our production code or our iteration speed on features if something goes terribly wrong. But we're starting to ramp up here. Then we can write all of our new code in Kotlin. Then we can, whenever we touch an old file, we can migrate it to Kotlin. And finally, we can eventually migrate all of our legacy code to Kotlin. This is a great way of, at every step of the way, we're able to consider the incentives of other people and say, you know what, is this still delivering value? Did we learn something about maybe implementing Kotlin? Our build time is terrible. Is it hard to write tests in it? Are we able to do something? Are we able to use the knowledge that we learned in order to work better in the future? Lastly, and this one's huge, is to make sure you're helping others accomplish their goals. This is a great way of showing that you're not just considering your individual incentives, but instead you're considering those group-level incentives, which you should be considering. One example that always comes to mind for me with this is my old tech lead and product manager. My old product manager, his name was James. And he would always come to us sort of a couple days before a release with like little bug fixes or crashes that we would need to fix. There would be something wrong that we'd want tweaked. And most of the time, we'd be willing to figure out how to make that happen. We'd put a quick fix into something here, and then we'd pay down that technical debt with the next feature. And so we built out some trust that way. And then I remember there was one time we were working on a feature on our review pager. So it was like a swiping, it's a swiping thing where you can view all the reviews on Yelp. And there was a bug in it, and it was a day before the release, and James came over to our technical lead, Carmen, and he said, Carmen, I think we should put a quick fix in to fix this for the release. And this moment will always stick with me, even though I just had lunch with Carmen last week, and she told me she's completely forgot about it, which is that I distinctly remember this conversation, and she said, you know what, James, I disagree with you on this one. And here's why. I'm concerned that if what we do here is we put a quick fix in, it will cause more bugs because this code is so complicated. We ultimately ended up not putting that particular fix in, but that always really stuck with me because it was such a great example of our technical lead understanding what was important to our product manager, and both of them having a high trust relationship where they could lean on each other and say, you know what, all of those times we were willing to put in those quick fixes, we understand what's important for James and important for the rest of Yelp. So the fact that we're really disagreeing strongly on this one means that there's a good technical reason for it and not just us being a stick in the mud. Now, a super important thing for this is that this means you can't always get your way. I'm going to bold that and then underline it because it's important. Because, again, I think it's sometimes so easy to focus on this question of being right. And dang it, I know what we should do here. And it's so important that if people just listen to me, things would be so much better. Chances are there might be, if you're working with other smart people that are solving the same classes of hard group problems that are aligned across your whole group, chances are, one, sometimes you're probably not always right. I know that's shocking, but sometimes we are not always right. And so chances are there are times when you're going to be missing something, and the perspective that someone else has is going to be really valuable in order to show you when you're just optimizing across your incentives and not optimizing across the group incentives. And so being willing to support someone else and maybe not get your way sometimes is so important to show that you're considering those other perspectives, so that when you are really standing tall and choosing the hill that you're going to die on, then people are willing to trust you that that's actually really important. So lastly, I wanted to close with a case study, so an example of how all this might fit together, because that was kind of wide-ranging. And let's say that you just joined a new team. You've noticed that they're struggling to ship effectively. There's no tests. There's no CI. So the build's occasionally breaking. Someone needs to come in and fix master all the time. And whenever you ship a release, your features need to be frequently patched. So you, as someone who understands how to fix these types of things, has some ideas. You want to put continuous integration in place so that way people stop breaking master. You want automated testing to ensure that old features don't break. And ultimately, you want to do a big re-architecture of the app so that that way you can introduce new patterns which make it more unit testable and maintainable. So first, we double check the incentives. If the incentive for everyone here is that we're building the best possible version of our application, which is awesome. The incentive for our engineers here is that if we have cleaner and more maintainable code, they're going to spend less time fixing builds and fixing bugs, and they're going to be able to spend more time working with new technology and trying out new features. And the incentive for our product manager here is that we don't need to spend half of each release cycle fixing the bugs that we introduced last time because we don't have good enough test coverage. So the incentives check out, so let's think about how we can make this happen. First step is we're going to want to build trust. So two big groups here are engineers and product managers. With the engineers, we want to build trust by showing that we know what's going on with engineering. We want to show that when we suggest something, we're doing this from a place of strength and a knowledge of engineering rigor. So we do that by writing really excellent code, doing really great code reviews, and always being someone that's a source of Android knowledge. So when someone writes code a particular way, say, hey, did you know about architecture components that might be able to solve this particular problem better? This can help you sort of accomplish some of those goals of unit testability without necessarily having to do anything at all in the first place. At the same time, with product managers, they're going to need to buy into this as well. So you're going to need to build trust with them by showing that you understand what's important to them, by delivering timely tickets, effective estimates, and showing that you understand what's important about the process of delivering software as well. Next, we want to understand incentives. So why isn't there any CI in place right now? Is it a situation where everyone knows that this is a problem that we're breaking the build every day, but no one knows that CI is even a thing? So if you just share some knowledge, that'll solve that problem? Is it a case where people don't necessarily understand that breaking the build every day is causing a whole bunch of disruption to people's productivity? So that's something that people need to be made aware of. Is it just too expensive? Are you at a place where they're like, you know what, we're super cash strapped, and so as a result, what we need to do is we don't have time to set it up because it's taking too much, it would take too much time and money to make that happen. Or maybe the same thing with tests. Why aren't there any tests? Are you not getting enough time? Do people not understand the value of them, etc.? Next, you want to educate as necessary. So you want to look at if it's taking a lot of time to break the build, or whenever someone's breaking your builds or breaking master, you want to be able to quantify that and say, hey, look, over the last week, our team has broken master 6 times, and that takes us 30 minutes to an hour to fix it every time that comes up, and that's taking a whole bunch of time. Or if there's just a knowledge gap, you can say, hey, there's this great way that we could fix us breaking the build. It's called CI. We can solve that. Next, we want to take that and then suggest a small change. So we say, hey, team, I think we should spend some time investing in implementing a CI server. It'll help us prevent these types of issues where master hasn't compiled, and it'll take us about 1 week if we set up service here, or whatever the service is. In this case, again, we can say this to our product managers, and we can also say it to the engineers and speak both of their languages. We show our product managers that we're willing to mitigate risk, while we're showing our engineers that, hey, we're solving these problems that have been plaguing us day in and day out. Next, you want to execute effectively and measure. You've withdrawn a little bit from your trust bank account, and so you want to rebuild that by showing that, again, you understand what's going on and you're able to deliver these types of things, that you're able to build more trust and be able to solve more of these problems in the future. And a super important thing is to measure your success, because I think it can be so easy sometimes when you make things better for people to forget about how bad they were. This is something that sometimes one of our CFO at Yelp likes to talk about. This idea is if you say something but no one listens, it's as if you haven't said it at all. And I think it's similarly true where if you make a change and it improves people's development, and no one acknowledges that or realizes that it's an improvement, well, it's not as if you might as well not have changed it at all. But in terms of your ability for people to trust in you and for you to suggest more and more of these types of changes, that might not build up your trust as much as you need to. So you want to measure the success of this. How many times are people breaking the build before? How many times are they doing it now? One thing that I really love to do is in our Slack channel, just say, oh my gosh, we did this thing last week and it's made my life so much better. I'm so thankful that we did it. And that could be a really great way of socializing the fact that, you know what, these types of changes are really good and really important. Team retrospectives are also a great way to do this. If you have a situation where maybe you're saying, what went really well? You can say, hey, what do you think about how did everything go now that we had CI? This is our first week of doing it. How did it go? Next, if that goes well, then what we've done is we've built up some trust so we can make a larger plan. So next you can say, now we have CI, I think we should start to think about writing tests. It'll help us prevent all these errors in production. It'll take a few months. What we can do is we can first set up Espresso, then we can write tests for a high-value flows, and then finally we can test everything. So what this does is, again, it breaks down that big goal. It shows that we're not just going to go off into a cave and implement nothing for a few months. We're going to have clear, concrete deliverables that provide touch points for people. And then what you want to do is with all of these larger plans, you want to gather feedback to make sure that people are able to provide input and provide those different perspectives that really show that you're willing to consider those, again, high-level group incentives. So your product manager might say that, you know what, I'm worried that we don't have enough time to do that right now. And so now if you're a little bit curious about that, you might find out that you only have 2 months to work on this, and you think that this project will take 1 month. Or this project will take 3 months, rather. So you can go back and think, maybe we should just set up Espresso and write some high-value tests rather than having to do the whole thing where we test our whole application here. That takes into account all those different incentives and comes up with a plan that works for everyone. Lastly, you want to finalize this plan, get people to say, yes, this is awesome, and then execute. Repeat the process, celebrate, and be happy that you have successfully made your team better. So that's all I've got. Tom Hanks says thank you so much. I don't know if Tom Hanks is as much of a thing in France as he is in the States, but he says thank you no matter what. They always say that you should take 3 things home from a presentation. I personally hope that you take more than 3 things home from this. If you're wondering about my 3 things, I gave them to you throughout the presentation, but they're also here. People in other disciplines are solving hard problems, but their incentives might be different. So your job is to make sure that you're thinking about those group incentives and not just everyone's own individual incentives. Learn what's important to other teammates, especially cross-functional ones, that you're able to speak their language and solve those hard problems together. And no matter how good your ideas are, you need to build trust that you can execute on them. So here's a whole bunch of external links. If you go on my Twitter account, @MaltzJ, these are also all linked on the speaker deck. A couple ones that I particularly enjoy. Christina Lee touched on some similar things, specifically on Kotlin adoption. In the second half of Life's Great and Everything Will Be Okay, Kotlin is here, which did a really great job of touching on these things. The next sort of section are books about process management, software engineering process that'll really help you in terms of communicating with product owners, maybe other engineers in terms of making your process better. My favorite is Agile Development in Scrum, which is really cool because it was written a long time ago. And they talk about how people developed software in the 80s, and it's like kind of crazy. The last set is a set about design things. My favorite is probably Fundamentals of Design, How to Think Like a Designer. It's a Skillshare course, and Skillshare charges you $99 to get up and running. However, they give you a 7-day free trial, and it'll only take you like a couple hours to finish the course. So if you sign up and then you like cancel it, then you can do it for free. So that's awesome. So I work at Yelp. We're hiring. Does anyone have any questions? I'm always amazed by how many people are here, and so few people have questions. I'm always the guy that asks the first question, so like the fact that there aren't questions is mind-blowing to me.
Hey, thanks for the presentation. That was insightful. I have one first question, which is regarding the real-life example that you gave regarding how to convince other stakeholders that actually refactoring technical debt was wise.
Yeah.
Why didn't you show incentives regarding designers? Is it because they are not included in this conversation?
That's a really good question. I think that the short answer is because I have more experience working with product managers, and I work on an infrastructure team now, and I did a bunch of sort of infrastructure work before then in terms of planning. Oftentimes is really the only reason I think that the problem of working with technical debt is very relatable. I think you could do a very similar thing with designers. If you think about the classic problem of my designer is only giving me iOS mocks, or my team doesn't understand why it's important to have material guidelines. You can do similar types of things where you can first understand where they're coming from. Oftentimes there's this question of like brand consistency versus product consistency. I forget the exact turn of phrase. My teammate Nico he's given me a thumbs up to say that I did it right. But so that's like a question, and sort of coming from a place of not just saying, oh my gosh, you won't do Android things, and understanding, okay, why is this idea of brand consistency really important? How can we take the concern that you have of brand consistency and marry it with my concern of making sure that our users have the best possible experience and have an Android specific design? Is the same type of process applied to designers. The only reason I didn't surface that here is because I haven't worked with designers nearly as much recently. But when I did, that was pretty much the exact same. I was following the exact same process, in that I would constantly be pairing with them and saying, why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? Can we do this a different way? Here's what I'm concerned about here, in order to do all those types of changes and accomplish the same things. Also, working with really excellent designers and product managers is really awesome, who love collaborating. Like, I've had such great fortune of working with so many great people who have patiently taught me about so many things related to design. Wow, no more questions. All right. Oh, is that one in the back? Got one all the way in the back. I'm making you run.
Hi, I was just wondering, I'm a social scientist, first of all, so hi.
Hi.
Probably the only one here.
That's awesome.
I was wondering if this is a widespread problem, this lack of empathy and trust, and what is Yelp, for example, doing to address it at the company level? Is there any training or anything going on?
Yeah, so I think the first question is, to answer your first question, is this a widespread problem? I honestly can't give you a good answer to that because I haven't done a methodical survey of all the companies in the world about how well they collaborate. And I'm sure social sciences methodology would be much better equipped to solve this problem than my sort of like own internalization of how to deal with these and the framework I've built on top of that. So I will say that you see these types of concerns come up again and again. And I think it's like my own take on that is it's frequently because there isn't an obvious answer to it. Like we can take a problem like, oh my gosh, there's no way to write unit tests in Android, and we can build a library to solve that problem. But like we're going to keep having the same problems with humans again and again and again and again and again. There's no way that we can train everyone to do this perfectly. To answer so don't know how widespread it is, but I definitely know it is something that consistently comes up. In terms of what is Yelp doing to resolve this, I think the biggest thing that we do to resolve this is hiring people that are really excellent collaborators and are really great communicators. I think especially when our team was small, this was the approach that we took, is you hire for a particular culture fit. I know that word can be kind of loaded sometimes, but I think in terms of how we think about it as Yelp, it's not whether we want to hang out with you or whether you look like us, but if we put you in a team situation, can you resolve disagreements effectively with people and come out with something that is really effective for everyone's interests? So that was the biggest thing that we did. I think that as our team has scaled, I think we're at the order of 500 engineers now. We're discovering that type of approach, much like many other approaches, doesn't scale because the organization just becomes so large. So I would not be surprised to see some type of more formal training or sort of more explicit, even if it's just more explicit cultural water carrying of that type of thing, and explicit calling out of saying, here's an example where people did something that is something we want everyone else to model, and let's deep dive into how they did that. Doing that more explicitly, I wouldn't be surprised if we start to do that, but that is like me speaking as an individual, not at all me speaking as a Yelp employee about what we're doing. One, two, 2.5. All right, thanks everybody. Have a good day.